This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 173 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Shout out to everyone who's joining the chat. Keep filing in. Take your comments, your questions throughout the show. Make sure you are subscribing to Subway to Shea on YouTube, like the video. You can follow me on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me personally at Rivera86. And if you want to listen to the show on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This show, not so much Soto-centric. There's not a lot of news coming out of the Soto world as much as it has been, outside of he's dwindling down the teams, and we may have an answer right around the winter meetings. I think somewhere around Sunday night, we might get an answer on that. But I have a special guest today, a good friend to the Subway to Shea podcast, James Schiano of the Mets Up podcast. You could see him alongside Mark Luno, a.k.a. Giraffe Neck Mark, part of the Foul Territory Network. Congrats on that whole honor that you guys got going on. James, how you doing, my friend?
I'm doing good, thanks. It's been a while since we talked, but happy to be here, and thank you again for the honor.
Absolutely. Yeah, it has been such a long time. The last time we did this, I wasn't even on video at that point. I was still doing just audio-based podcasts. And I think we previewed the Wild Card series.
I think so, yeah.
In 2022, and how far along that this Mets team has come, from the ups and downs, the roller coasters in between. It's crazy just to see how they have been doing. You can follow James at James_Schiano and at Mets Up Podcast as well on Twitter. James, there's so much to talk about when it comes to this Mets team. And first and foremost, it just dropped today that is it Sacramento? Is it going to be Las Vegas? I don't even know what they're called at this moment in time, but the Athletics have signed Luis Severino to a 3-year, $67 million deal. That's, I think, $22.3 million AAV for him. Last season, 11-7, 3.91 ERA, 161 strikeouts in 182 innings pitched for the Mets. In the postseason, he was 1-1 with a 3.24 ERA. James, what did you think of this contract? I know we'll get into the lead up to this as well with the Mets signing Frankie Montas, but now you look at both deals here, and it looks like the Mets kind of made out well when it comes to signing Frankie Montas. What did you think of the deal for Severino?
First thing, great for Luis Severino. Happy for him. He just secured the biggest contract in the Athletics franchise history, no matter what city they're playing in. And for a guy that last year couldn't even get a deal barely bigger than Drew Smyly, now is going to have almost $70 million guaranteed for the next 3, which, again, amazing for Luis Severino. I think it says a lot about the pitching market. It says a lot about how much money these pitchers are going to go for, how many years even a pitcher like Severino, who's had kind of 1.5 good years in his last 4, could get. Definitely tells me that Sean Manaea is almost guaranteed to get a 4th year and possibly somewhere around $100 million, which to me probably puts him out of consideration for the Mets. But we saw Severino do a lot of great things with the Mets last year. We saw him really lean on his sinker, go away from his 4-seam fastball because he's lost a lot of life on that recently. The sinker played well in Citi Field. It played well with a great Mets defense behind him. And we saw him specifically move away from his old hard slider to a sweeper. That was his best pitch in terms of results. It was one of the best pitches in baseball, honestly, from the eye test. It was just completely nasty. It was a Frisbee out there. All those changes made him a really good pitcher, but it still made him a little one-dimensional. I've talked a lot about on Mets stuff that he was never really able to find his footing against left-handed batters. We saw in some of those games against the Phillies with Bryce Harper. We saw some in the NLCS with Freddie Freeman, Shohei Ohtani. He was never really able to get his changeup down consistently enough to get left-handed hitters out regularly. So, again, happy for Luis Severino, but if you had to put the two guys up against each other right now, where Severino's getting almost twice as much money as Frankie Montas with an extra year, and the A's had to give up a draft pick to sign him, I think I'm going to take Montas in that 1-to-1 10 times out of 10.
I'm excited for Sevy just to be getting this deal. I think he's earned that, like you said, through his play throughout the season. He was a guy last season that I really wanted the Mets to pick up to be kind of that, anchor at the back end of the rotation. He ended up being more of the, 2-3 starter for the Mets. But I was always willing to give him an opportunity, considering that he pitched in New York, considering that he was one of those kind of top, thought about pitchers in the like late 2018, 19, he was one of the guys that you would think of.
One of the best in the league.
Yeah, one of the best in the league, and especially being over there with the Yankees and pitching so well. I was so excited to get him over here. And, the season that he gave us, you really couldn't have asked for anything better coming off of the season he had prior to that. And you could talk about, for me, it was that game 1 in the wild card game. I know he gave up around like 3 or 4 runs, but he kind of stabilized himself and helped team get to a victory. You talk about the complete game shutout he had against the Miami Marlins, and always being that guy to hold the OMG sign. So it's going to be tough seeing him go, but the way the pitching market has developed over the recent years, and especially this year with how expensive all these pitchers are, the Mets had to make a move in their own right, and they did so by signing Frankie Montas. And you mentioned it earlier, Jeff Passan was on it first. The Mets officially made the signing official, and 2 years, $34 million deal, 17 mil AAV. So probably about 5 mil less than what they would give if they had Severino, and that's the same type of year deal. He's got an opt-out, which, kind of lends towards the Sean Manaea type deal that Sean got last season. 31 years old. Last season, he was 7-11, 4.84 ERA, 148 strikeouts in 150 and 2/3 innings pitched. I mentioned that it was probably going to be the end for Sevy, which we now know he's going to be heading to Oakland. Probably could be the same thing for a guy like Jose Quintana as well, although, with the way the pitching market goes, you never know. But it's just so expensive. You look at what Matthew Boyd got. He only made 8 starts last season. It was 2-2, 2.72 ERA, but he got 2 years, 29 mil for the Cubs. What did you think of both of these deals here? And you still favor this deal, even though Boyd made 8 starts, you still favor this Montas deal over something like what Boyd got for his talent?
Yeah, for sure. The difference between Boyd and Montas, well, one of the big ones is that Matt Boyd, you said he made 8 starts last year. He's only made 23 starts since the end of the 2021 season. So this is someone who's been off injured. And Matt Boyd throws a 91, 92 mile an hour fastball. Not saying that you can't be successful with that, but you're paying an extra few $1 million a year to get an extra 5 ticks on the fastball, which I think most executives, most fans, most players would say that that's a pretty good deal. I definitely caution people not to just stare at Montas' ERA and not to think about his time with the Yankees when trying to evaluate him as a pitcher. He's someone who has done really well the last few years to deepen his bag, deepen his arsenal, deepen his repertoire. He can consistently throw 5 pitches now for strikes against both sides of the plate. That's something that's very rare for pitchers in baseball. He has a splitter, which is still a plus pitch. I mentioned the velocity. He can still dial up to 96 miles an hour. And his velocity ticked up a little bit as the season went on last year, as did his arm angle, as did the life on his fastball, which some of that could have been tutelage when he went to the Brewers, helping him alter some things. But also a big part of that is that Montas was just getting stronger after tearing his labrum towards the end of his stint with the Yankees. That's very serious surgery for a pitcher, very serious surgery for a power pitcher. So getting a full year back under his belt, getting to 150 innings pitched, and then very clearly getting stronger as the year went on. I see this as being so eerily similar to both the signings of Sean Manaea and Luis Severino last year, where you're kind of able to jump the market, get someone who might not be as sexy or as noteworthy to the average fan or the average person, but a tweak here, a tweak there, because that definitely identifies something with Montas. Probably some stuff on top of what the Brewers did with him, where his strikeout rate climbed almost to 30% in his 11 starts with them after the trade deadline. But they definitely have something similar to they did with Severino, like I mentioned the adjustments before, similar to Manaea, all the adjustments that Jeremy Hefner and Eric Yeager's made with him. There's something to Montas here, and I'm confident about this signing. I grew significantly more confident after seeing the money that Luis Severino got.
Duran Rivera wants to give you a shout out for predicting the Montas signing, which, I've been watching Mets up over the last couple of weeks, and you've talked about the possibility of bringing a guy like Montas in here. I want to take a look at his pitch repertoire because I have a slide up here from Baseball Savant, and let's bring that up right here. There we go. So he relies, on that 4-seam or about 33% of the time, going to the sinker, 19%, cutter 18.7, split finger 18.3, slider 10.7. Which of these pitches are, obviously he throws the fastball most, but which of the pitches that he throws are you excited about the most here?
Definitely a splitter. His splitter is a true plus pitch. It's the pitch that kind of catapulted him during his stint with the A's when he really broke out in 2019, 2018. turned him into someone who could be a trustworthy major league starting pitcher, and turned him someone that was a borderline all-star before he was suspended for PEDs, then got hurt, then got traded, then got hurt, and it kind of all went awry for him. But I really also want to look at some adjustments he made with the Brewers that didn't exactly change how often he was throwing these pitches, but significantly changed what counts he was throwing them in and what situations he was using them. Mostly that sinker, which I've heard him refer to as a two-seamer. So just for the sake of conversation, I'm going to call it a two-seamer here. He was throwing that pitch against lefties 8% of the time when he was with the Reds. 8% of the time overall against lefties, 7% of the time on the first pitch. When he got moved to the Brewers, they pushed that pitch up against lefties to be thrown 20% of the time and 34% of the time on the first pitch. And in doing that, they took his fastball, his four-seam fastball, which I said before is picking up velocity and picking up some life as season went on as he got healthier and stronger. They then took that pitch and made it one of his put-away pitches and kind of mirrored it, tunneled it off of his splitter. So they had him getting ahead with his two-seamer and then also trying to stay ahead in the counts and kind of work when he was behind with his cutter. And then he was finishing his at-bats with splitters and four-seamers. Those wound up being his two highest put-away pitches by the end of the year. So I think that little tweak right there, that helped him bump his strikeout rate. And the results still weren't good with the Brewers. The ERA was still high. But so seeing something so simple like that, where you can adjust the pitcher sequencing and find a new strength, I think it made a huge difference for him. Again, I'm going to keep talking about that strikeout rate. It went from under 20% with the Reds to nearly 30% with the Brewers. That's a change of going to someone who's in the bottom third of the league to the top 20% in the league, in terms of starting pitchers. That's a massive shift to me. And then you also have to think about the fact that he was pitching Great American Ballpark in Cincinnati and Family Life Field in Milwaukee, which are Milwaukee's not exactly a bandbox. Those are two places that are very easy to hit home runs. Citi Field's not like that. This is the first time he's going to be in a pitcher's park since he was with Oakland 4 years ago now. So I see a lot of upside here. Again, I like the fact that he's got the 5 pitches. I trust the fastball. It's not great shape-wise, but the velocity is good. I like the color. I like the slider, and I love the splitter. It's just there's so many pieces here to being a successful pitcher that as long as he stays healthy and keeps what he was doing at the end of last year, I see a good floor with some legitimate ceiling. Just a guy who's like a 3.8 ERA, 170 innings, 190 strikeout. That's where I see it like a mid-range outcome, which would be amazing for the money we're paying him.
Well, basically, if he could give us, what Sevy gave us last year, I think that's right there. You've made it sound so good, and I know a lot of Met fans, it happens that they were upset about the deal hearing it at first, but you look at the length of the contract and how Stearns deals with those kind of prove it to me type years. He's got durability. He made 30 starts last season. 21 of those starts were 5 innings or more, which is, something that the Mets desperately need out of their rotation, considering that the bullpen is such a big, important part of it. And to keep those guys fresh and healthy, he only 3 Mets starters last season made pitched 30 or more innings. I'm sorry. Only 3 Mets starters started 30 or more games last season, and that was Sevy, Minaya, as well as Jose Quintana. Now, if you could get a guy like Montas to be doing something like that, it's very helpful for the rotation.
Yeah, and all 3 of those guys you just mentioned are gone. So I know some Mets fans were upset when they saw the name, saw the ERA, and saw the money initially, but this team has to replace over 500 innings from last year's rotation until we get to next year's rotation. And you mentioned how rare it is that a guy like Montas made 30 starts. Only 3 guys on the Mets did that. There's just fewer guys in baseball every year that are making 30 starts. So there's an argument to be made that volume in terms of just pitchers, in terms of bodies, in terms of guys who can pitch and have a beating heart, you need on your 40-man roster at any given time. So signing some for a little bit less money so you can probably get a greater volume of them in, some quantity over quality probably helps the Mets at a time like this where we really just have to build this rotation for the second year in a row on the fly. And I give David Stearns the benefit of the doubt because he built the last one on the fly really, really, really well. So let's just try to do it again.
I don't know if you agree with this, but I think that this is going to continue to happen until the Mets develop starting pitchers in their minor leagues because, that's the only way that they're going to be able to spend on their own type of pitchers. If you're going to, spend the amount of money that guys like Corbin Burns, Max Fried, all the top line pitchers want, you kind of want to do it with more of your homegrown type talent. Instead of always bringing in mercenaries. And we saw how that, kind of really didn't work in 2023 when they had Verlander and Scherzer. It just didn't work. So this method that David Stearns has, and as Marcos puts it, he has earned the benefit of the doubt to, shape this team the way he wants. I know everyone freaked out when he made the signing, but this is what he did last year as well. When he brought in Sevy was in a worse spot, I think, coming into last season than Frankie Montas is right now. I think even Sean Manaea as well. Like Sean Manaea was not in a good spot when he came. Like he was a reliever, and they were able to turn him back into a
Yeah.
starter.
And think about Sevy. I said it before. I'll say it again. The market viewed Sevy the same as they viewed Drew Smiley, who's probably never going to start more than 10 games a season again. He's basically become like a fireman, a long reliever type. So the fact that the Mets were able to do that twice in 1 year also just gives them this kind of shine on the rest of the pitchers on the market, being like, oh, I want to go to the David Stern School for Pitcher Rehabilitation. And the year after that, I'm going to guarantee myself $70 million on the open market. Just being able to see how we took in Severino Manaea and spit them back out. And those two guys' contracts, again, likely will combine for north of $160, $170 million after they came in here for a combined, for 1 year each for a combined $30 million. Like that's nothing to sneeze on. There's not a lot of other teams in baseball who can boast that kind of thing. And you mentioned the mercenaries from 2023 with Scherzer and Verlander. That's the exact inverse of what I'm saying this team should be doing now. Ignore the quality for a little while in certain areas. I do think I've kind of flipped my mind. I think the Mets should actually go after Corbin Burns now, with or without Juan Soto. But if you're going to sign guys for 1-2 year deals anyway, just get a guy you think you can elevate rather than someone you think is already elevated, because then now you can use that extra money to just get a third guy. Like I'd rather 3 guys than 2 guys the way this Mets roster is set up right now. And I think I believe they're thinking that exact same way.
And I do love the opt out, after the 1 year deal. It allows these pitchers not only to prove it, but if they do, they have an opportunity to do what Severino did and land a big contract where, he could have been out of the league if he had another bad season. He honestly
Literally.
could have been out of the
Or
league. But
reliever.
you look at Sevy, you look at Manaea, and if this works with Frankie Montas, I think Mark Healy said this on Twitter today, that this Mets team and the way that the pitching staff is handled from Stearns to Hefner to the pitching lab, it may become a destination for pitchers to get themselves right. And, maybe the Mets are the middle ground, but if they can tap into that potential and it gets them to the postseason every year, I think this is a positive that goes both ways.
Yeah, and there's also the other caveat similar to Severino that's going to be true with Montas, where if he does pitch well enough to opt out, we can offer him a qualifying offer. He has not been offered one in his career, which means he's eligibly offered one. So even if he pitches really well, opts out, goes to a new team, just like Severino, we will get a compensatory draft pick back. So that's just another tiny little added caveat that turns this into more of a mutual option than just a simple player option, which I'm sure was also part of the calculation for the Mets front office.
Yeah, absolutely. And continuing on that line of those pitchers that need those prove it to me deals, that need that guidance, the Mets have shown interest in guys like Walker Buehler, as well as claim Holmes to be a starter. So that I found that interesting. And at first I was like, I don't know how I feel about that. I think he would be a great setup man for Edwin Diaz, who's probably in need of that, bridge from the middle relief to himself as a closer. But the more I've heard about it and the more people talk about it, I'm kind of intrigued by the fact that having Clay Holmes be a starter.
Yeah, I'm very into Clay Holmes being a starter. I had mentioned this on the Mets Stuff podcast months ago. I think even before the season ended to Mark, or maybe it's just a conversation him and I had, because a lot of times our conversations just blends between real life and our podcast. But the fact that Clay Holmes he's a very unique reliever in the fact that he gets a ground ball rate over 60%. That's kind of a mark that you look at where if you're getting 60% ground balls, you've elevated yourself as a ground ball pitcher past guys would just call ground ball pitches. You're now in a different echelon. If you're getting that many ground balls, like that's a desirable skill. That's something that we think is very repeatable, and that's something over an expanded sample, like you get as a starting pitcher, will have a massive impact on the quality of contact that comes against you. As a relief pitcher, though, in a small sample, and Yankee fans, baseball fans saw us with Holmes last year, when you just get balls hit and play on you consistently, if you don't have that many chances to make better on it, some of them will just find the hole, and then a couple ground balls go here, a couple bloopers go there. Suddenly, you lead the league in blown saves, and your fans want your head on a stake, and they bring pitchforks to the stadium. So I think just his entire methodology as a pitcher works better as a starter. Then you take a deeper look and look at the types of pitches he throws. Holmes has one of the most disgusting, nasty sinkers in the league. It's a true outlier in how much it drops relative to his arm angle and the expected movement of the pitch. It's so good that it'll be able to be thrown moderately against pitchers on both sides of the plate. He leaned on it so much as a reliever against pitchers on both sides of the plate, and it was effective against both. And then you have his sweeper, which is one of the nastiest pitches in all of baseball. That's kind of something the Yankees love, those like supinator types where like you're when I say supinator, I mean like your thumb is moving away from your body when you release the ball, trying to get better at these like pitcher development terms, as I keep trying to learn and get better at this stuff. But Yankees love that because they love guys with the sinker sweeper method. Like Holmes was the exact embodiment of this. They traded for him a few years ago, got rid of his curveball, gave him the sweeper, and then he went ballistic. And he also has a gyro slider, which is a slider that kind of just moves tighter and just straight down. So since it only moves straight down, it also works really well against hitters against both sides of the plate. So now you have 3 pitches. 2 of them work really well against righties and lefties. One of them is ferociously good and will destroy any righty that comes to the plate. Then you really just need a 3rd pitch. And he started experimenting with some fastballs in the playoffs, 14 fastballs, bringing it back. I would like to see him maybe try a changeup. It would be a weird changeup. You don't usually see sinker sweeper changeup. I mean, you do, but then it's a question about how good that changeup could be. Maybe it's going to be a cutter, but I really, really, really like the idea of Clay Holmes as a starter and think that we're kind of in this age right now where teams are starting to realize they can bring guys back from the bullpen because all these relievers were starters at one point. Clay Holmes was a starter his entire life until he got to the major leagues, and they told him he was a reliever. So kind of take advantage of this right now. You got the Seth Lugo, you had Reynaldo Lopez. I think Jeff Hoffman's going to do the same thing.
Michael King.
Yeah, Michael King is a great example. That's someone who doesn't line up that differently from Holmes, but just has a better command of a lot more pitches, which is I don't think that's a place Holmes can't get to. I really like this idea and think it would be really, really forward thinking for the Mets to give this a shot.
You know, with Montas, let's say they do get a Clay Holmes, like you mentioned, there's also Jeff Hoffman out there. How many of these guys do you kind of just take a flyer on? Do you just do it with one? You'd be like, oh, Clay Holmes, that's it. Because he's had that more experience, especially in the postseason. You mentioned he was really good this season, 3-1 with 2.25 ERA. His career ERA in the postseason, 1.35. He's got 20 strikeouts and 20 innings pitched. So, you know, he's got the experience out there. You look at a guy like Jeff Hoffman. Do you prefer one to the other, or you know, would you take both of them?
Both would be very risky. You probably want to get one of these guys, then someone else you know is a proven starting pitcher. I might slightly lean Hoffman. I can just see Hoffman doing it a little bit easier. He reminds me just so much of the way that Reynaldo Lopez became a starter last year, where his fastball is very explosive. You just hope that the velocity stays sharp enough that the pitch will like drop 2 miles an hour because now he's starting instead of relieving. He'll still be good enough. And then his slider's amazing, and he has a 2-seamer and he has a splitter. Just he's already shown all the 4 pitches, so as long as he can just throw the 2-seamer and the splitter more consistently, I think it's an easier path. But I think Holmes with more outlier pitches and that extreme ground ball rate probably has a little bit more upside, but with significantly more risk. I don't know. Hoffman was also a starter more recently. He was one of the top prospects in baseball as a starter, where Holmes was always a middling prospect and broke out as a reliever. There's definitely pros and cons to each. I would love to see the Mets try one of them, though, because similar to where you got Severino last year, where you paid him well below market rate and got well above average production compared to what you were paying him, the Mets have, again, like they need so much volume into the staff that it'd be nice to take a couple of these shots a little bit below where most starters are getting paid, so that maybe you can give a little bit more juice to somebody like Pete Alonso after you sign Juan Soto. Give a couple extra $1 million to a spot like that. Maybe then you give the couple extra $1 million back to Sean Manaea instead of getting Walker Buehler and I don't know who's another bargain pitcher out there. I'm trying to think of right now. Instead of getting Walker Buehler and
is Flaherty considered or Flaherty or Evaldi, or they're a little.
I think Flaherty's going to get 5 years. I think he's going to get a big deal, and he's sharply on my do not touch list. Evaldi could be fun. Evaldi's someone I do like. I think a little bit relatively more, but. I'd probably rather take one risk and then get someone a little bit more proven than maybe get 2 more guys in the middle. And that could also be Quintana, because I'm sure Quintana is only going to get a 1-year deal. I know he liked being here. I know the Mets liked having him here. So there's probably a good chance that you can get him for, again, like a 1-year, $13 million, and then take your shot on someone else more in the middle ground of pitchers.
Does where they play into any of the, the thought process and bring, like, obviously Sevy, I was like, oh man, pitch for the Yankees. I want to bring, same thing with Clay Holmes, pitched in New York, pitched in a tough ballpark for pitchers in Yankee Stadium. And because, obviously hitter's ballpark for sure out there. But, the Philly's kind of the same way too, as New York, tough place to play at for Hoffman. Does that come a big part of bringing in a guy, one of these 2 guys for you?
Yeah, definitely. I think especially in terms of Holmes, because I think sometimes the Yankees, I know the Dodgers do this so well. They might, maybe for good, maybe for better, maybe for worse, get a little bit obsessed with their home ballpark and their pitching game planning. The Dodgers do a weird thing where even when they get pitchers with really, really, really like lively fastballs, they specifically throw them low in the zone, which is something that not many other teams do because you're getting a higher rate of swings and misses high in the zone. But if you do connect on the pitch high in the zone, it's a better chance of leaving the ballpark. The Dodgers know they have such an advantage every game they play that they tell their pitchers to avoid home runs at all costs. So they're willing to allow more balls in play, more line drives, low in the zone, just to avoid the long ball. They're something that they're fine with. It's a weird thing to do organizationally. I think the Yankees also, obsessed with all these supinators, just really want these sinkers because they're so deathly afraid of any fly balls in their ballpark because there's a better chance of leaving the yard. Where balls in play at Yankee Stadium perform worse than other ballparks. They have so much less surface area in their outfield. It's easier to run down a ball. I think that if you bring in a guy like Clay Holmes, he might be less afraid to throw that fastball as he was in Yankee Stadium because you're scared of all fly balls. Fly balls in Citi Field, that's great. We're happy to do that. We're gonna have Jose Siri tracking him down in center field. We're gonna have an above average defense well across the diamond. It probably makes a transition for specifically him a little bit easier because you're less afraid of very bad things happening with a pitch you might not be the most comfortable with.
I know Met fans are concerned with the fact that the team is not going after kind of the bigger name pitchers like a Burns or a Fried. And they, Stearns has really kind of laid down the structure of what he wants to do when it comes to this rotation and, how they put it together. But, he did offer Yamamoto a big deal in 2023. So I don't think it's out of the realm that the Mets would at some point, if it's not this year or another year, if they see the potential, if the pitcher is youthful enough and has the stuff, I feel like they will go after a starting pitcher if they feel need to.
Totally. I think the big difference, though, with Yamamoto compared to this class of pitchers is just simply his age. He was a unicorn being 25 years old and he hit the market. You can give him a 10-year deal. He's only 35. Like, okay, that's great. I think for similar reason, I could have seen if it dragged out a little longer. I don't have any knowledge or sources about this, that the Mets might have been interested in Snell more than Burns or Fried, because if you can sign a 31-year-old, whatever he is, for a 5-year deal, again, done by 36, we're okay with that. But Burns, I'm sure, scares David Stearns because giving a 30-year-old an 8-9-year deal, which it looks like he wants, you just kind of know that 2 or 3 of those years are going to be totally wasted. But you're always going to anticipate a large injury for at least one of the years. And then the last 2 years, that deal just not being the same kind of top 30, top 40 starting pitcher you expect when you sign the deal. And also the thing that puts me off Burns a little bit is that he's like very softly regressed the last few years. He's still an incredible pitcher, top of the league, but you don't exactly see the major Cy Young upside that you saw in him a few years ago when he was hands down the best pitcher in baseball through 21, 22. So when you don't have the mega upside and you still have mega downside that any long-term contract for a pitcher has, it seems like a pretty easy no-go zone for David Stearns, who already has been vocal about not wanting to give out these long-term mega deals for pitchers.
If Stearns is not going to go after, Corbin Burns, who he saw most of his career while out there in Milwaukee, I mean, that says a lot to me. I look at these contracts that these pitchers have gotten throughout the years, and really only 2 long-term contracts have really stood out to me. And that is Garrett Cole, as well as the Max Scherzer one that he got with the Nationals. Those are the only 2 contracts that really standed the test of time for as much as they have pitched. And even Cole showed a little wear and tear this season.
Yeah, he did. He when he got back, though, and he was healthy, he was good. But missing that first chunk of the year was very scary for Yankee fans until Luis Severino showed up and pitched like an ace for the first 3 months. That kind of saved their season. But I do think that even though a lot of these long-term mega deals are scary for pitchers, those 2 that you mentioned, I would say definitely worked, especially Max Scherzer. It's probably one of the most valuable contracts that was ever signed in the history of baseball for how much he pitched and how effective he was with the Nationals, eventually being traded that last year to the Dodgers. And Burns does exhibit some similar tendencies, a guy like Scherzer, where the velocity's never been overpowering, so you're not as worried about him losing a few ticks. He has lots of different tools in the toolbox. Like Burns has the color, it's his primary pitch, and it's incredible. He can also throw the 4-seamer and the 2-seamer, and he introduced a sweeper this year, and he has the curveball. Like there's a lot of things that Corbin Burns can do, similar to Max Scherzer, that when you start to lose some of the natural ability, now you can start to win with your mind. Where I've really swung myself back in on Corbin Burns getting a long-term deal. I was arguing with some friends about it today because I just don't know how else the Mets can bridge this gap into when their pitching development starts to be ready enough to produce pitchers year after year if you really want to be competitive with your rotation for the next 3 seasons. Unless you go out and swing a trade for a guy like Eric Crochet, which will cost tons of prospect capital. I think he's incredible. He's also not without risk. Unless you do something like that, Corbin Burns to me is the most obvious and ready-made fix to doing it. Mostly just because I'm confident that he can hold a middle ground while not being elite for a very long time in this deal, any arm injury notwithstanding. So I've gone back and forth on this in my own head. I don't think he's ever going to be one of the 5 best pitchers in baseball again, but for exactly what the Mets needed, exactly the time they needed, it oddly does make a certain amount of sense.
We talked about Clay Holmes, Hoffman as well. Walker Buehler is probably another guy. He may get more money than I thought But he's another guy that kind of has to be on that prove it to me type mode, because he really struggled last season. 1-6, had a 5.38 ERA, was pretty good in the postseason. He does have ace type stuff, but close to the bottom of the league in a lot of stats. And when it came to his arsenal last year, he was really close to the bottom of the league there. No qualifying offer from LA, which kind of makes it a little intriguing to me, so they don't have to give up the draft pick. I kind of wanted him before he got the Tommy John surgery years back, if they were able to, swing a trade or anything. But I would definitely take a flyer on Buehler. But I think you said you wouldn't. And what is your reasoning behind that?
I don't think I hard wouldn't. It would just very much depend on years and numbers and everything. If he wanted the 1-year prove it deal, I don't think I would say no to anybody for a 1-year contract, even if he wanted like something like that was similar to the qualifying offer. And I was very concerned initially that the Dodgers didn't offer him the QO. But then when they jumped and swung so hard on Blake Snell, that was clearly part of the decision-making process there with not giving Buehler the $20 million, because the Dodgers are so close to the top of the luxury tax threshold, and they're still annoyingly in on Juan Soto that they know that every single dollar is really, really valuable to them. And they probably had an indication that if you offer Walker Buehler the qualifying, he is coming back for it. And there's $20 million more dollars you spent on your rotation, where you can spend an extra $10 million on the rotation and get Blake Snell, who's probably one of the 5 best pitchers in baseball. Where Walker Buehler, you kind of hope, rediscovers himself to become one of the 30 best pitchers in baseball. And the Dodgers also, they're so good at developing pitchers that they could see guys like Landon Knack and Dustin May and Bobby Miller, any of those guys popping up, taking a step this year and being as good as Walker Buehler could really ever be in 2025. So for them, knowing what we know, it makes me less nervous that he didn't get the qualifying offer. But you don't really know what you're going to get with Buehler. He was horrific in the regular season. He was god awful. It took him until that series against the Mets that you were like, oh, there's Walker Buehler. And the slider's still great. The curveball's still good. The fastballs were not as good. Definitely not nowhere close to where they were before he got hurt the first time. It's definitely a concerning package right now, but I don't know. I was concerned mildly with Severino Manaea last year, and the Mets were able to do things with it. And again, for a 1-year deal, it's probably worth it to take a shot, but I don't know where his contract's going to wind up between not getting a QO, pitching well in the playoffs, and being miserably bad in the regular season. I have no bearing of what money he's going to get or years.
Is he a guy that because he came back from that surgery, that's where the struggle is? Like, what is the fix for a guy like Walker Buehler to get him back on track to being that starter that he was? He was kind of the 1B to Clayton Kershaw, sometimes 1A.
He was one of the fastest rising stars in baseball before that surgery. And it's probably something that's way above my pay grade that gets him back. It's probably something biomechanically that I just simply don't know anything about, because he's a guy when he came into the league, he had one of the most explosive four-seam fastballs in baseball. Had 20 inches of inverted vertical break. It was living at the top of the zone. It was 96, 97, 98 miles an hour. It was just simply disgusting, and he hasn't even been above 96 miles an hour since the shortened season in 2020. It's a very long time ago now, and that's something that we've had a lot of data that says he hasn't been back there, so it's a good chance he doesn't get back there. What his next iteration probably looks like could be similar to what this iteration of Luis Severino looked like, where you kind of have to leave the strikeouts behind and become a pitch to contact guy. And that probably just will never get you back to a certain ceiling. Severino this year, as good as he was, he struck out 21% of batters. And he was at his peak. He was striking out over 30% of batters. That's similar to Walker Buehler was at his peak. It's just that guy might not really be there anymore, but that doesn't mean there's not a successful pitcher inside of him anyway. It's just, it's not going to look the same. It's probably going to take a really, really cohesive plan, a lot of really, really specific and motivated biomechanical stuff to get him back to a certain spot. But I don't think that 2019, 2018 Walker Buehler is ever walking through that door again.
Shout out to everyone that's in the room right now. Over 500 people in the chat. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe, not only to Subway to Shea, but to the Mets Up podcast, as well as James Schiano on X at James_Schiano. James, looking at the rest of the starting pitcher targets that are out there and the free agents, a couple people in the chat I want to get to because they have some thoughts on, how about Stanley Babbage saying, bring back Sean Manaea? Are you on the full train? I want Sean Manaea back, but as more pitchers are starting to sign, his contract seems to be getting, a little richer and richer as the days go on.
It's just, it's hard for me to look at Sean Manaea and be like, yeah, I think I'm going to give you $100 million, because it didn't come out of nowhere last year. He's had some success in the past. He was a big time prospect. He's built like a hoss. He was a big game pitcher. Like, he did all the things you want, but just, $100 million. Like that just seems like so much for him. Like it wouldn't surprise me at all, depending on what team Sean Manaea winds up in. If Frankie Montas had a better year than him next year, that might be crazy for some Mets fans to hear, but I think that's probably the truth. And again, with the Mets needing volume more than anything else, and David Stearns' lack of desire to give out very long-term contracts to pitchers over 30. Sean Manaea, I believe, is already 32 years old. Giving him a 4-year deal until he's 36 seemed to me comes with lots more risk, and I think a lot of Mets fans are willing to admit just because he was so fun and so cool and so good down the stretch. But it's I don't know. I could be way off on this, but to me, Sean Manaea isn't. I just don't know if he's a $100 million pitcher. Maybe in this market he is a $100 million pitcher. Maybe for what the Mets need, he's a $100 million pitcher. It's hard. I think it'll be hard for me to bite that bullet. And I think similarly for David Stearns, depending on how crazy the Manaea market gets.
Yeah, it feels like, every day by the minute that his market is just continuing. I think it came out today. John Heyman said that the A's had offered him, actually, Sean Manaea, a contract to come back, which was a lot higher, and he, declined, and they moved to Sevy on that deal. So it'll be interesting to see, where his market ends up and where he ends up at the end of the day. I really would like him to come back. I thought he was a great clubhouse guy. Same as Frankie Montas, as we're hearing. That was a big part of the signing when it came to Frankie Montas, is how good of a clubhouse guy he was.
Oh, they love him.
So I really would love to see him come back. But, man, every day I'm like, I feel like it's going to be a whole lot less that we're going to be seeing Sean Manaea again. So, we'll see what happens with him. Shea Parking Lot bringing up the pitcher. How about a guy like John Means?
It's John Means has been so injured. I don't even know if John Means is pitching in 2025 based on all the injuries he had again in 24. I wish it would have worked out for John Means. I always liked John Means a lot, and John Means got really screwed by the timing of the stadium changes in Camden Yards. Because, man, if John Means would have been there for the Great Wall of Baltimore, he would have been a regular all-star. But he really got screwed up by that, and he never really got to fully realize his total potential. I don't know if John Means. I mean, maybe he's a 1+1 for the Mets. You rehab him for a year, you might get an above average starter in 2026, but. That to me is, I think the Mets really desperately need volume in 2025 if they want to compete. So I don't know if John Means is exactly a fit at this very second.
You mentioned his name earlier, Garrett Crochet, and you said a trade would be a lot for him. What would you think about a trade for Garrett Crochet? And, how much we're going to be giving up a lot, I would assume.
Oh, a ton. You have to start the deal probably with Jet Williams or Brandon Sproat. I have at least one of those guys, if not both of them. And then you probably have to give one of the Drew Gilbert, Ronnie Mauricio, Luis Angel Acuna triumphant right there. And then you probably also have to throw one exciting younger player on it, someone who is a little bit wider of a range of outcomes, but has some star potential, like a Jonah Tong, or Nolan McLean, possibly a Boston Barrow, who I know someone's rising hard through the Mets system right now. They like a lot, possible top 100 guy in the next year or two. It would cost a lot. You would really gut this farm system, but also you would get a 25-year-old who looks like he can be one of the best pitchers in baseball. I think there's a better chance that Garrett Crochet wins one of the next 3 Cy Young Awards than Corbin Burns. And he doesn't make any money right now, which could help you a lot in getting, again, more volume on this team under that third luxury tax threshold. So that's probably the one mega player in the league right now I would pull the trigger on that trade for. If it happened to be Jet, Luis Angel, and Tong, I think I would do that. I think the Mets would also do that. I don't know if the White Sox want more. I think a lot of other teams could probably beat that if they wanted to, but it would cost you 3 of your top 10 prospects easily, and probably 3 of the top 100, 200 prospects in the league.
I think if they're asking for more than, one of our pitching prospects, I think I would be hesitant, because if this team's going to grow pitching in the minor leagues, man, I kind of want to hold on to like the Sprouts of the world, as well as Tong, and see if the Mets can develop these guys. Because the Mets, like we mentioned earlier, the Mets want to get to a point where they're not having to do these kind of short-term deals as much, and don't have to deal out a whole lot of money and a whole lot of years to starting pitching mercenaries. So I kind of want to see these guys develop it and see if this new system that has been in place with David Stearns, if they could bring these kids up and really make something out of them to be a part of this Mets rotation.
And that's definitely their goal. Like, we see year after year how much more expensive these pitchers get. I think that was the big reason why Mets fans were so mad when they saw the Frankie Montas contract. Like, $17 million for this guy? But yeah, like Taijuan Walker's making $20 million. Miles Michaelis makes $17 million. Like, if you're a pitcher with a beating heart and you've had one good year in your last 4, you're getting $15, $18 million minimum. I think on Mets Up, I called exactly that Frankie Montas was a $17 million guy, because Mark and I were doing an episode about bargain pitchers. And I said the line was guys who are going to make $15 million or less. I couldn't put Montas or a guy like Walker Buehler or Luis Severino in that list because based on the rest of the market, you're just that they're going to cost more than that. Someone who is intriguing to me in a similar line, who I think people will freak out about, but who I love is Nick Pivetta. Year after year, his stuff, his strikeout rate's been near the top of the league, but he's been just massacred by his ballparks he plays in, first Citizens Bank Park and now Fenway. Fenway being one of the worst parks for any pitcher to pitch in at all. I think he's a guy you have to give up some compensation for him because he had a qualifying offer attached to him. But a lot of this does begin with Soto, seeing where we think this team's going to be next year. Pivetta right now is the guy to me in the market who has the most upside for the least amount of contract you're going to have to give him. And Mets fans would be so mad if that contract was signed, and I would be so happy at the same time.
Yeah, I mean, with the potential he has, it could be another solid signing, another solid move by Stearns. Reiku78 is asking if the Mets do not land Soto, who is their plan B? And does Stearns get told he has to do something to have a good offseason, or do they stand pat? I would assume standing pat is meaning doing more of what they did last season when they didn't land Yamamoto.
Yeah, it would be incredibly disappointing, I think, at this point to not sign Soto just because of how much hoopla there's been. I think there's a good chance we don't. If you had to tell me right now, like pick team, I would say the Yankees. But if they don't sign Soto, possibly I could see them back in on Burns. But I know that Steve Cohen just completely trusts David Stearns and anything he wants to do in terms of player acquisition. So if that's not someone that Stearns sees the value for, I don't think Steve Cohen will be like, we have to do this with the team this year. I think then what happens is the Mets turn their sights like hardcore to Pete Alonso or possibly, I guess, either him or Willie Adames, depending on where their desires lie. If they want someone who's going to be more of a bopper or someone's going to be more of an athlete, move Mark Vientos to first or keep him at third. I think that's for sure where the next thing is. And then you just keep attacking the middle of this pitching market. And again, like I don't know how much the Mets plan changes without Soto weirdly. Because again, like last year, we saw the plan not change that much with or without Yamamoto. Like I think you still just pepper the middle of the pitching market. You probably get guys, Mets fans on Twitter going to hate that wind up having 3.70 ERAs next year. And you're like, oh, wow, 170 innings, 3.70 ERA. That was a really good season. It's just, I don't think there's as sharp of a plan B as most Mets fans want, besides definitely going after one of the bats, whether they be Adames, P. Alonso, or possibly Bregman, who hasn't been linked to the Mets at all, but just I'm sure that money will, the Mets have to spend a bunch of money this offseason. They have so much off the books that you definitely get one more big hitter, and then you probably just do everything else almost like you always would have, sadly.
Yeah, and I was hoping that if they were to sign Soto, that they would, bring back Pete as well and try to make this offense as legit as possible in taking the next steps. Because as much as, it's okay doing these type of deals, now the terms of this team has changed. It's not evaluating and seeing, if this team can make the playoffs. Is now, can we get back to the NLCS? Can we take the next step and make it to the World Series? I think that as much as Stearns is going to stick to his guns and get the pitchers the way he wants, I do think that there needs to be a next step type move for them to do, because obviously the fan base is not going to accept not getting back to the postseason, or maybe not even back to the NLCS.
But also when you look at this objectively from what happened last year, it was more or less a miracle the Mets did what they did. It was. Like the fact that they went on this crazy second half run, then a crazy postseason run, like based on the team you had, if you asked any Mets fan on June 1st, like when's your season going to end, it would be the 162nd game of the season. Like there was no, I feel like there wasn't even consideration this team could make it to the Final Four, and they did. And there's probably a lesson not exactly getting obsessed with a result that you couldn't have predicted. I know this might going to hurt a lot of people, but think about the Giants from 2 years ago, where I'm not comparing these franchises, I'm not comparing these rosters, I'm not comparing these organizations. The Giants winning a playoff game probably torpedoed what they were going to do for the next 3 years. So they got a little bit obsessed with the team, and I think it's important that David Stearns is not doing that right now. Similar to what the Mets did in 2022. The Mets won 100 games in 2022, had a horrible finish, and then Billy Epler said, everybody on this team is getting above market value, and they're coming back. We're going to bring the band back together and do it again. And that was a disaster. The Mets are still trying to pick up the pieces from that 2023 offseason. So I think there probably is a world where, and I know I saw someone comment this just now, Marcus Figueroa, that if the Mets don't get Juan Soto, there's probably a chance that this payroll looks significantly differently than it did the last 2 years. You get as close to the luxury tax as possible. You reset your penalties for something that you thought you might never do. And also, if we sign Soto, we will never reset the penalties. Next year, we'll have a $350 million payroll, and we're going to gun. But if you do not get him, there probably is a deeper conversation about what sets this team up best for the next 5 years rather than the next 1 year, and how sustainable of a winner you can make.
And it is very important to, if they don't get Soto, to kind of get back under that luxury tax. We saw with this whole Sevy situation, the compensatory draft pick that they get, it's not a high pick because they're over the luxury tax. They're not going to be getting, a higher pick in the draft. So to get back under the luxury tax as any way as possible would probably be helpful for the team. But like you said, if they get Soto, you can forget all of that immediately.
Totally. And also, that's all saying this team still is only at $170 million payroll right now, and the luxury taxes don't even start until we spend at least 50 or 60 more million dollars. So I'm not saying if we don't get Soto, this team's just going to suck and it's going to be a horrible season. What I'm saying is that the team winds up just looking very similar to the team last year, but not as one of the most expensive rosters in baseball. And you run the same thing where, like, we're going to stay competitive. We're going to be in every game. We're going to play good defense. We have Francisco Lindor. We have Mark Vientos. Hopefully we have Pete Alonso. And you try to stay in the race. You hope to make the playoffs. You hope to get hot. Like, that was the exact plan last year, and it worked to perfection. Can't count on that every year. It was definitely more lightning in a ball than anything else, but there's a lot of ways to skin a cat. And I think that this Mets team, there's a lot of different ways this roster can look next year. And the only thing that could really change that is Juan Soto.
Armand brings up another possible pitcher. He goes, he'd rather sign Lance Lynn than bring back a guy like Jose Quintana. I thought Lance Lynn signed, but I guess not.
No, he's out there. Lance Lynn is not exactly a culture fit for what the Mets want. I know the Mets like to have a little bit more fun than a guy like Lance Lynn, who's known as being a big-time hard, though. And Lance Lynn also, he's just a fastball spammer. It's fastball every single time. Pitching a place like Citi Field will help that, keep some balls in the yard, but I don't know if I want Lance Lynn, this Mets team next year.
I'm surprised that Quintana doesn't get a little more respect for the way he not only finished the season, headed into the postseason, but he got a rough start. Having to be kind of ace of the staff with the injury to Senga and, Sevy not getting off to a good start as well. And the entire team and just in general, not getting off to a good start.
Yeah, but I also think that everyone remembers how bad Quintana was for times in that first half. And they're like, all right, we know exactly what Jose Quintana is. Jose Quintana is a junk baller. He's going to mix it up. He's going to stay away from the heart of the zone. We signed Jose Quintana, and we really hope we get 160 innings with a 4.1 ERA. Like, that's what we're really hoping for. And I think he's a very known commodity, but that's not exactly a bad thing either.
We talked about trades for Crochet, a guy that I would trade for, but I don't think that, Seattle's up for doing any trades at this moment in time. But Luis Castillo is a guy that I always think about bringing in. I don't know what he would cost. I assume it would be a lot as well, but especially with the way, just pitching in general is going around. What are your thoughts on a guy like Luis Castillo?
I love Castillo. I think he's someone who's definitely taken a step back the last few years as someone who's thrown as many innings as he has in his career would. But also, I don't think it would cost very much to get him. I think there's a big part of Luis Castillo where that team wants to get rid of the trade value. So if you're trying to get rid of that, the contract value. So if you're trying to do that, like, it makes sense. But there's definitely a downward trajectory in his velocity. I think you could probably get away with like a Brett Baty and then one of the lower tier prospects. You get Castillo, you eat the money, and you have someone who's a really trustworthy two at the top of this rotation. Someone who he hasn't really pitched in many big games. I'm comfortable calling him a big game pitcher. He just seems to have that vibe for me. He has some yellow flags again, like the velocity's falling down, the whiff rate's falling down. He's turning 32, 700 innings since 2021. But I like him a lot, and I think he will not cost very much to get, much less than Crochet.
And also the fact that Seattle's just has a plethora of starting pitchers, man. They have nice depth that I would like to have at some point, sometime soon. Marcos Figueroa is saying this is about the Clay Holmes, that the Mets will have to go to a 6-man rotation. Is that something that we're going to start seeing a lot more of in baseball? 6-man rotations out there. I feel like the Mets always want to do something like this, but the injuries just pile up, and then we see a lot more Tyler McGills of the world out there starting to start throwing more for us. So I don't know how they get to that point, especially with these kind of short-term deals. But at some point, you would think, if they have Senga, if they're somehow able to get a guy like a Roki Sasaki, throwing that out there, I would assume that a 6-man rotation is something that would be in play.
Oh, I think the 6-man rotation is almost a given for the Mets if they can actually wind up with 6 starters before the season starts. Just because Kodai Sang in his career pitching in Japan, they run 6-man rotations there. there was a stat that went around that Frankie Montas last year was much better on the 5 days rest and the 4 days rest. I just think it makes a lot of sense given the fact that rosters did expand by a player. You can carry 14 pitchers now. You can have 6 starters while still maintaining 9 relievers. I also, something I would like, I think if it keeps the pitchers healthier and fresher over the course of the season, and if you're going to be a little bit more experimental, like say with a guy like Clay Holmes and Jeff Hoffman, who you're probably not getting more than 140 innings out of, I'm very comfortable with 6-man rotation. I think he could be good for this Mets team.
G-Money Stacks says, instead of wasting money on Garrett Crochet, could the Mets look to Brandon Sproat, a guy like Shane Bieber, who, coming back from injury and, has all the potential in the world? Any other starting pitchers, prospects from the farm as well?
I think the best chance for a Mets starting pitching prospect to impact the team next year is Blake Tidwell, just because I feel like he had slightly better results than Brandon Sproat AAA. And I think Tidwell also has significantly less ceiling, is much more of a known commodity. So I think that there's a really good chance you see him in a spot start in May or June. But if Sproat gets a chance, it's the kind of thing where you want to give Sproat the chance to run with it. But Brandon Sproat hit a major roadblock last year at AAA. Like, he's even behind where Christian Scott was at this time last year, where Christian Scott was breezing through AAA after he had an injury, or before he had an injury at the end of the 2023 season. So I think the Mets need to see a lot from Sproat, both in spring training and the early part of the season, if he's going to get a shot early next year. I think by late summer, you could see him have a shot, but there's just still a lot of work to be done there. In terms of Shane Bieber, I'm not in on Shane Bieber at all. He has a big blinking red light to me. Like, do not sign this guy. I do not trust what's going to happen. His fastball velocity's fallen year after year after year. He's had shoulder injuries. He's had elbow injuries. His cutter used to sit 89, 90 miles an hour, be one of the most devastating pitches in baseball. That's like an 85, 86 mile an hour pitch now. He's been throwing 91 miles an hour since a shoulder injury in 2021. It just seems like he's been trying to compensate for it ever since. I don't think he's anywhere near the upper echelon pitcher that he has been in the past. It's just I can't see him ever getting near a top 20 starting pitcher again. Maybe top 20, yeah, but top 10, no way.
I'm going to share the pitching real quick, the pitching list that's out there for, I think MLB.com posted it of who's left as free agents. Any of these other guys that you would take a stab at bringing? I know you mentioned Nick Pivetta here. I know he's not going to be ready. I think he's still injured, but a guy 28 years old like Patrick Sandoval, we've heard rumblings about him. Is that someone that you would look into at all?
I think so, but I think similar to Bieber, and we talked about John Means before, you're not getting that much in 2025 from Patrick Sandoval. I believe he had, I don't want to say it was Tommy John, but I think he had a very serious injury that happened in the middle of this past season. So I don't think you're getting more than a half season from him. So I think the Mets, again, are going to be much more concerned with adding volume to the staff this year, which is why a guy like Nathan Eovaldi does make sense. I think that he'll be a little bit cheaper than the other pitchers who are on his tier. I think he's good. I really like Spencer Turnbull as someone who could be a very cheap pitcher this year, more of a reclamation project. He has a couple plus pitches. He was awesome last year with a new sweeper with the Phillies before he got injured. That's kind of the story of his career. I think a Japanese pitcher that's posting this year, Tomoyuki Sugano.
Yeah,
he's an NPB legend. He threw almost 2,000 innings there. He has a whole slew, a deep bag, a fastball, a cutter, a sinker, a splitter, a curveball, and very good command. Don't think you're getting much upside. He's in his late 30s, like 35 or 36 years old. So I guess that's more mid-30s actually. But he's someone you could probably add to the back of the rotation for a 1 or 2 year deal on the cheap. And he probably would like to come live in a place like New York City for a few years, have a countryman in his rotation. I think that's something that could work. Cal Quantrill, who was let go non-tendered by the Rockies, I think he's similar where you're not getting a lot of ceiling, but there's a guy with one really plus pitch. That's his splitter. He didn't pitch well in Coors Field last year, but who could ever pitch well in Coors Field? he had a really good year in 2022, just more colors, more curveballs, more splitters. Like I think there's a path for Cal Quantrill to be the new Jose Quintana. If you don't even bring Quintana back, who I still think would bring back again a 1 year deal. Alex Cobb, similarly, is just like it's a very narrow arsenal for a pretty old guy who has been injury prone, but not exactly anything with his arm or his shoulder in any way. So I think that Alex Cobb had like a knee and a hip and a side. So I think he's someone who you can bring in on the cheap who might be kind of fun. But that's kind of it. There's not a ton of options out there. I know I like Mike Soroka a little bit too. He changed the way he was as a pitcher last year at the White Sox. He went away from the sinker that always made him very successful when he was young in his career with the Braves before the injuries.
But he's more of a reliever now, right?
He stepped forward as a reliever, but I think there's a good chance he wants to mark himself as a starter and see if he can do that again first. It's similar to what we're talking about with Hoffman and Clay Holmes. You take what makes you good in the bullpen, and now you apply it to being a starter. You're just going to make more money. I'm sure that's what Soroka wants, being on the open market after tearing his Achilles twice, one of the worst stories in baseball in the last 5 years. But I think that's probably the cluster of pitchers the Mets are going to be looking at, which is not sexy, not that fun for Mets fans to hear, but just looking at what we saw David Stearns do last year, just feels like that's the way he's going to want to shop and how I think he will shop.
You're looking at, Roki Sasaki kind of coming in like Yamamoto did, although, the deal's going to be a lot different. He's going to get that minor league deal. You look at Sagano, is he more like that Imanaga type? Imanaga wasn't really talked about as much because all of the attention was on Yamamoto, but, ended up being really good for Chicago.
Yeah, but Imanaga had a much better strikeout rate than Sugano in the MPB, and his fastball had a much more electricity. Shota Imanaga came in, and he had one of the most devastating fastballs, especially from a lefty in baseball. There's another Japanese pitcher posting. His last name is Osara. I forgot his first name. He has a similar, very lively fastball to Imanaga, but he throws about 4 mile an hour slower. It's barely a 90 mile an hour pitch, which is kind of the line where it's like, I don't know if you're going to be able to be a starting pitcher in the major leagues, not even throwing 90 miles an hour. I would stress that with Sugano, I don't see very much upside. He's more of a junk ball or kitchen sink type that's going to be wily, crafty, mix a lot of nonsense, spin the ball a lot, and try and get guys out. Get you to, similar to saying before Quintana, that 3.8, 3.9 ERA over 150 innings. I think that, again, if you want the upside swing, it's Pivetta, but you're going to have to give up the qualifying, the draft pick and the IFA bonus pool to get him. I think Montas was one of the bigger upside swings on the market, and David Stearns jumped at the opportunity. And then past that, it's the relievers turn starters. It's Turnbull, it's Hoffman, it's Clay Holmes. If you want to find upside below market value, it's a very strange starting pitching market this offseason. That's why a guy like Luis Severino gets $70 million.
Yeah, this is probably the strangest I've seen pitching go in an offseason, just for the amount of money and the years that these guys are getting. You look at Severino, like you said, it's just mind-boggling how these guys are just. And for the A's, it's the richest contract in their history.
Crazy.
I can't believe it.
Do you know who's the second richest contract in their history?
Is it Trevor May?
It's not. Well, that's for the, I think, one year AAV, I think, on that team 2 years ago. But it's Eric Chavez.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, considering all the players that they had on that team, right? Like, you got Johnny Damon, they had the Giambis, they had, that they've always had good pitching, whether it was Mulder, Zito, Hudson. It's crazy to see, where they are now, and who knows if they're staying in Sacramento or go to Las Vegas, who knows. But James, I really appreciate you joining the show today. It's a lot of fun chatting up with you again. I feel like I saw you more at Citi Field than we've talked outside and in this podcast. So I appreciate the time, man. It's been a long time.
No, it was great. Even not working for the Mets this year, I was at Citi Field at least 40, 50 times. I love being there. I love that place so much. It's definitely a happy place. I'm very excited, with or without Juan Soto, to be back there again in April.
Absolutely. What do you got coming up with Mark and Mets Up, or anything else you would like to promote out there?
Yeah, I mean, Mark and I are just on Solo Watch. The second it happens, like, we're going to have an episode ASAP. Whenever it happens, however it happens, it looks like it's going to happen this weekend. So everyone stay in tune if you want to listen to us talk on my Twitter feed, Mark's Twitter feed, the Mets Up Twitter feed. I've also been doing some writing and some podcasting for Roll the World and NBC Sports. Every single week, I've been doing a pitcher breakout article from last year explaining how different pitchers have gotten better. I covered Tarek Skubal. I covered Hunter Green, Bryce Miller. Tomorrow I'm going to have one coming out about who's it? Bailey Ober. And then I'm also writing, doing some Juan Soto watch articles for them too. So if you want to see me write, over there, if you want to hear me talk, Mets Up, and then follow Twitter account for anything.
So where do you have Soto going to the Yankees? You have him staying?
Yeah, in my heart, I don't know. I got really excited these last few weeks, but then I think about the last 6 months, and it always would have. If you would have asked me in August where you think Soto's going, I would have told you the Yankees without a doubt in my mind. So I just have to. I'm trying to ground myself and think about how I thought for 6 months rather than 6 weeks here.
Well, there's just so much rumors going out there, whether it's Boston or Toronto. It's like I'm so over it already, and just figure out where to sign already. I mean, it's great for us, for content creators, because we got stuff to talk about. But man, this has been, as a Mets fan, it has been painful to excruciating. Yeah, absolutely. Where's Mark's head at when it comes to Soto? Is he also saying going to the Yankees?
Oh, Mark has no doubt in his mind that he's going to be a Met. Mark has not even let himself think that any other possibility can happen, which has been a good yin and yang for us on the podcast, yin and yang, because we don't disagree very often. This one we have a sharp disagreement on, makes for some better content. But I just wish, I tweeted it today, I wish that Soto would just give us a date and time, like LeBron James did, where it's like everyone sit on the couch Sunday at 12:30, right after the college football playoff is announced. I'll tell you where I'm going to play. Then we can just handle this. It can be over, because we're just waiting for this Jeff Passan tweet, and it's gonna feel like a kick in the head. You don't know when it's gonna come. You don't know how it's going to come. You don't know what time, what day, anything. it's a stressful moment. I wish that we would just be like, this is when it's going to end, right here, right now.
Follow James at James_Schiano and Mets Up Podcast at Mets Up Podcast. Appreciate you, James, for coming on again. You have a great one and enjoy the rest of the Soto watch.
Yeah, you too, man. Thanks for having me on.
All right. That was James Schiano of the Mets Up Podcast. Catch him alongside Mark Bluino, a.k.a. Draftneck Mark. And they are part of the Foul Territory Network. We got a few more things that we're going to talk about before we get out of here. The Mets, latest news and happenings with the Mets as they brought back a couple of their minor leaguers. Grant Hartwig made his return to the team, signed on a minor league deal with a spring training invite, as well as them bringing back Alex Ramirez. He will be a part of the minor league team as well. I know that they let him go, but we talked about this with Will Salmon, that there was a possibility that they would be coming back. So they are. Maybe Ramirez can get himself back going because he struggled in the minor leagues the last couple of years with a top prospect and just has not been able to get himself going. Grant Hartwig coming back from a knee surgery, had that meniscus tear. So we'll see what happens and if he is able to come back healthy and be a part of this bullpen, because I know the Mets bullpen is constantly rotating pitchers out of there. I don't know if they're going to sign any big bullpen arms, whether it's a Trinan or a guy that I would want in, I'm drawing a blank, pitcher from San Diego. Why can't I remember his name now? But he the lefty out of San Diego. I can't think of his name right now off the top of my head. But yeah, the Mets need to definitely boast some of their bullpen. I know we didn't get into bullpen today, but at some point we're going to talk about the Mets bullpen and what are the options out there. Like I said, Clay Holmes would have been perfect to be a guy to set up for Edwin Diaz. But if they're going to put him in the rotation and it sounded good, I was like it. James liked it. So we'll see what happens. So last thing before we head out of this show today, QBC this Saturday, guys. The QBC this Saturday. Make sure if you got your if you didn't get your tickets, get them now, because the QBC is upon us this Saturday. Jose Reyes, you see him on the poster. He's going to be there. I think Ray Knight is going to be there. Greg Jeffries, Turk Wendell. They'll all be doing panels. Doors open at 10. I think the show ends at around 6 o'clock, 6 or 7. So make sure you get out there. I'll be on a panel, the State of the Mets panel with Mark Healy. That one starts at around 1:15. So make sure you guys get your tickets, check it out, say hello, and be a part of it, man. So it'll be nice to have you guys there and see you guys and be a part of the whole fun event. So I appreciate every one of you who have tuned into the show today. It's been fun. It's been great. Shout out to James Schiano again for being our guest today. Appreciate everyone in the chat. 674 people in this room right now. I wish I could shout you all out, but man, that's so many people in here. This is coming down to the wire with Juan Soto. I don't know we're gonna get. I was happy to do a show without talking so much about Juan Soto. We talked so much about him over the last couple of weeks, and to get away from that for a day was kind of nice. And hopefully next week will probably be the last time we'll have to talk about Juan Soto free agency. And if he signs with the Mets, we're going to be talking about him a lot. But if not, we move on, because he'll either be in Boston, New York, Toronto. I mean, I don't know how much bigger a player they are. I don't know if LA is lying in the weeds waiting to pounce on it, but they may be. But most definitely this should be ending at some point this weekend or next week. We will find out where Juan Soto will be hopefully as a New York Met. That's what I'm hoping for. So we'll see what happens with Juan Soto. But the next time you will catch me on the Subway to Shea podcast, it will be a very special winter meetings edition, not Sunday morning, but Sunday evening at 9 p.m. with my guys, Keith and Key, Shea and Sons. It's a special Subway to Shea and Sons podcast. as those guys will be joining me. Those brothers from another mother will be joining me on the show. Make sure you're tuned in. 9 o'clock. We will be back here, 9 p.m. Eastern time, to talk about the winter meetings preview. Maybe we can break some news. If I'm not going to break the news about Juan Soto during the QBC, let it hold out till Sunday night at 9 p.m. Then we could talk about it. We could chat about it on the chat here. But for now, I'm going to head on off. I'll see you Saturday at the Queens Baseball Convention. I'll be on that panel, like I said, with Mark Healy, Kelly Franco, my guy Ibby from Till Mets Do Us Park, and Joe DeMayo from the Mets Pod and SNY. Make sure you check us out. Like I said, Jose Reyes. Let me bring up the poster again. Jose Reyes is going to be there. Ray Knight's going to be there. Turk Wendell's going to be there. And Greg Jeffries. I think Art Shamsky's going to be there. I am not too certain about that at the moment, but he's going to be given the Gil Hodges Award. We'll see that there as well. There's going to be a game show that they're going to be doing, and panels and signings, and they have merchandise there. So come check it out. There's going to be a whole bunch of vendors. It's a fun experience. I went for the first time last year. I enjoyed it. Make sure you get out there and enjoy it. The location, the 4 Points by Sheraton, 3368 Farrington Street, Queens, New York. Get your tickets if you haven't done so. But that wraps up the Subway to Shea podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be a part of the show on Sunday night. We're a family here, and I love talking with every single one of you on this show. I love getting your comments and your questions in. A lot of great questions, a lot of great pictures that you threw out there for James to discuss. I will have more for you when we come back on Sunday. We could talk about all the free agents during the winter meeting preview, and hopefully talk about Juan Soto signing with the New York Mets. But until then, this has been Anthony Rivera for the Subway to Shea podcast. Make sure you're following the Subway to Shea podcast on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me at AmRivera86 as well on X, and subscribe on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and YouTube. Make sure you like the video. Make sure you subscribe. Helps get that algorithm up there and gets us out there to more and more Met fans. If you enjoy the show, be a sub. Subscribe to it. We're getting close to 750 subscribers, and that's all thanks to you and being a fan of the show, which I appreciate oh so much. But that wraps it up for me, Anthony Rivera, on the Subway to Shea podcast. Always remember, let's go Mets.